Welcome, everybody. Today's webinar is going to be about Palestinian statehood, the possibilities, because of the Anglo-European alliance that is going to be recognizing a Palestinian state at the United Nations this September. So, question is, who gains, who pays, who pretends, and we'll be getting into many of the issues of what's going on in those countries themselves, because why now suddenly? And yes, the French and the Saudis put together some sort of peace initiative, but there aren't any maps. So we should just know that's how it began. First of all, before we actually start our webinar, just a few words from the Naaman Academy about our fall semester launch. Classes will begin October 20th, and we have some very exclusive materials, very interesting, pre-recorded, on-demand lectures. You watch the classes at your convenience. We have bi-weekly live discussions. And what's the whole idea? You join an active community to become well-informed and proactive, so you can also discuss issues with knowledge and confidence, especially as concerns Israel, the West, and what goes on in general in the Middle East. In particular, defending one's values and way of life, because we know today there's a lot of threats, not only against Israel and anti-Semitism, but against democracy as well. Okay, just 2 words about myself. I've lived in Israel some 48 years, studied Middle Eastern history as well as Jewish history, served in the army, first war in Lebanon, been very active in my community, in particular bridging gaps between where I live, small Jewish community in the Galilee, and Bedouin town that's right next door, that my community, and I was involved as well, helped them to get land rights. Still teach, wrote a book on Hamas called Hamas Jihad, published 9 years ago, and I'm a representative of Partnership Together for Mizgav, and of course, co-founder of the Naaman Academy. We want to deal with conflict resolution. Give this a bit of a background when we're speaking about going to the UN and these countries now going to recognize Palestinian State. So, first of all, we have to go back to Resolution 242, which was in November 1967, right after the Six-Day War. And what did it speak of? A just and lasting peace, withdrawal of Israeli armed forces from territories occupied in the recent conflict. You'll notice it does not say the territories, and that was on purpose, because the understanding was a territorial compromise. For achieving a just settlement of the refugee problem. And when they said that, did not say Arab or Palestinian refugees, because there were Jewish refugees coming from Arab countries as well, right, alongside of Palestinian refugees from the 48 war. And yes, a few thousand Jewish refugees also from the 48 war. And the establishment of just and lasting peace, in which every state in the area can live in security. Self-explanatory. You had then the Camp David Accords, 1978-79, with Egypt, right? The peace with Egypt, we're familiar with. Israel withdrew from Sinai. It's been demilitarized. And there's a multinational force there, not the United Nations, but rather international force led by the United States. It's been quite successful. And the framework for peace in the Middle East, speaking of Israel making peace with the entire Arab world, and that included Palestinian autonomy, and that was signed on by Menachem Begin. You see in the picture on the right-hand side with Anwar Sadat and Jimmy Carter. Why do I emphasize Begin? Because Begin is from the Likud, right wing. And in international relations, it often does not make such a big difference if someone's from the right or the left. There's a matter of statesmanship. Okay, Jordan, Israel has a peace agreement from 1994. Borders defined. Jordan became a buffer state between Israel and Iraq. And water rights. Israel supplied Jordan with a lot of water for the first 25 years after the agreement. Since then, Jordan has built its own sort of water systems. And there you see down below a picture of President Bill Clinton with Yitzhak Rabin and King Hussein signing the agreement. Next comes the Oslo Accords. And it's here that there is this whole question, did it succeed or fail, and what is it all about? First of all, it spoke of a Palestinian entity alongside of Israel. Many believed it would lead to a two-state solution, and yes, that was the idea. It was when Labor was in power in the 1990s. And first, they did base themselves on previous UN international solutions from the Israeli perspective, believe that the Palestinians would want to have a state because it'd be very important. A state is a tool for which one protects the national identity and the framework. And the state of Israel, Zionism, right, Jewish national liberation, within the framework of the Israeli state, Jewish culture and people thrive and survive. The idea of a one-state solution was rejected because it leads to chaos and disaster, and the nation-state understanding is preferred. And just give a few examples from recently, right? Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, the Yemen civil war, and elsewhere. When you try having one state, when there really should be more than one, we see what happens. You have never-ending conflicts. And others are drawn in because there are either interested parties that are from the outside or those that get stirred up from the inside that didn't have a tremendous interest, particularly in one community or another. But now that there's a war, they have to take sides. Okay, so one-state solution is seen as not a good idea at all. And the question was, how do you go about a two-state solution? So we also throw into the mix here something very important. What's called the red-green axis. We've had webinars on this before. And I call it an axis because we are speaking about Marxism, Leninism, right? The Bolshevism. We have a picture of Karl Marx and Joseph Stalin as the Reds. And we know that they have risen again in democratic countries and are threatening many regimes. And they have made an alliance with what's called the Greens. The Greens being the Islamist movements or jihad movements. Said Qutb representing them more than anyone else. He wrote in the 20th century, had his incendiary book, Milestones, really about how to destroy the West. Okay, and the two are in alliance, as we know. We've seen them on campuses, and we've seen them politically recently. You can take certain politicians running for office who have the support both of Islamists and of your Marxists. Mamdani, for instance, mayoral candidate in New York. Okay, now this alliance or axis is anti-Zionist, and they say they're not anti-Semitic, but we know they are. They both lean on your Nazism and anti-Semitism protocols of the Elders of Zion, and work together and bring about extreme right-wing reactions, who, by the way, are also anti-Semitic. It's a threat to Europe. Everybody knows that. It's a jihad threat to the Muslim world, and their ultimate objectives are world conquest, just that they're mutually exclusive. But we're not going to get into that fully. So why is the Anglo-European alliance, excluding the United States, why are they suddenly decided that there has to be this declaration of support for a Palestinian state? First of all, continental Europe was leading. The British are very much caught on as well now. And there's France, Germany, other EU members, and of course your Anglos, and I throw in Britain here because I'm not sure the British consider themselves part of Europe. Yes, they are, but they always see themselves as, part of the Anglo world. So put them under Anglos with Australia and Canada. And of course, the need for a solution to Palestinian-Israeli conflict, which everybody knows for years, right, has been an issue, but why so much now? They are very afraid, not only of the Greens and the Reds, but of the backlash. And the backlash against both of them, it comes from the far right. I want to point out here, and I've done it in bold here, the anti-Semitism, attacks on Jews undermine society and meritocracy, both by the Reds and Greens, and those who are against them, the extreme right. You could say neo-Nazis. Also, that's the one thing they all have in common. These governments are very fearful of a destruction of democracy, the political center, and by the way, they're often accused of being too far to the left or too far, too liberal or whatever else. They are essentially the center, even if it's left of center. We're not speaking about a Bolshevik leadership or extreme left. Sometimes they do have parties that are fairly extreme left that are part of the coalition, but they're junior members. Okay, so that's what they're afraid of. And they fear the Reds, the Marxists, more than anybody else, at least in the meantime. Even if they do have partners in coalition who are more to the left, they're afraid of an uprising as such. And we see here There is a picture of an anti-Israel demonstration in Berlin in 2014, and you see a demonstrator there. He has a tattoo with September 11th on his arm and a picture of Yasser Arafat. In other words, supporting the destruction of America, right? That's what September 11th represents. And being an anti-Semite, demanding the destruction of the Jews, they're all tied together. All right, and that anti-Semitism in these Western societies is the first step in undermining these democracies, meritocracies. Let's just move to public opinion polls for a moment. All right, we're doing France, Britain, and Germany, and examples of schisms, how these societies are being torn apart. So you have what's known in France as the rally or the far right, Le Pen's party, that today polls some 36%. There aren't any elections at the moment. The new Popular Front, which is far left, polls 25%. So you notice the two extremes are well over 50%. They're 60%. And in the middle, which used to be sort of the agreed upon group, the ensemble led by President Macron gets between 15 and 18%. And that's all. In other words, French society is being ripped apart. Also socioeconomic reasons for such things. We take Britain. The Labourites are in power. They won a landslide with over 60% of vote, as you recall from their last election only about a year and a half ago. But the Reform or right-wing party led by Nigel Farage has some 34% support. Labour, 25%. They're the ones in power. And your Conservatives, only 15%. And Labour has been going further to the left. At one time, they'd gone very far to the left. They moved more towards the center. They won the election and now moving back. Taking Germany, alternative for Germany, the far right party, 25%. And we know that Chancellor Merz, he made an alliance, and he's a conservative, but his alliance is with the socialists, like a grand coalition again. So they try to stay centrist. They're very afraid of this alternative for Germany. We will point out that all three of the far right-wing parties have a very anti-Semitic element in parts of them, right? Not all. Some are just hardline conservatives. Okay, and much of the objection here is they are against this immigration, and they're anti-Muslim influence, Islamic influence, and they're also against the far left. Take opinion polls in Canada, Australia, and yes, the US also. So in Canada, there's liberal-led government. They are quite to the left and quite, how should we put it, critical, very critical, by all these countries, extremely critical of Israeli policy and the Israeli government. Close to 50% of the population believes that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. And we know that that is not true. It simply isn't. You do the numbers and you crunch the figures, and some 1/3 of those killed out of 60,000 reported by Hamas. But some 1/3 of them, which Hamas doesn't separate out, but Israel, we know, is they're Hamas terrorists, fighters, whatever. Okay, and 61% want recognition of a Palestinian state. However, 63% demand that Hamas be removed. In other words, they're anti-extremism. You have in Australia a Labour-led government, also good amount of support. 56% support the government stance against Israel. And 45% favor recognition of a Palestinian state immediately. You'd say it's not a majority, but only 23% are against. So, in essence, yes. As for America, and when I was doing the stats, I said, let's take a look at the states. This is the first time that I can remember ever that the majority of Americans view Israel unfavorably. Now, say it's very much in the Democratic Party, people who support Israel, but are anti the Israeli government today and anti-Israeli policies in Gaza. But you start having Republicans who are not favoring Israel. It's true, the majority of the Republican Party does stand by Israeli policies today. But that is very, very iffy. So this is Israel's situation. And examples of schisms, if we would say, we take Canada as well as Australia, okay, not yet, but it's bubbling. In the meantime, these governments that are very much to the left have support, and they do not support Israeli policy. And the surprise here actually is with the Americans. Let's take a look at the Arab-Muslim world for a moment. We have the Arab Spring failure, beginning around 2011, and went for several years, and what was supposed to bring democracy to the Arab world turned out to be an Islamic awakening. Challenges by the Muslim Brotherhood, we saw it in Egypt, we saw Libya fall apart, Syria fell apart, civil war in Yemen, the Islamic State Caliphate, their rise to power for 3 years of terror by jihadis that nobody had ever seen the likes of such violence in recent times. And there's tons of violence in the Middle East, right? So there's a fear of future Islamic uprising. And on the one hand, you have the moderates, Saudis, Egyptians, Emiratis, Jordanians, versus Turkey, Qatar, and Syria. Now, Syria is a proxy of Turkey, but Turkey is the most powerful Muslim country in the world, and Qatar has hundreds of billions of dollars that are invested in jihad education worldwide, and we see it being done in American universities and education system as well. We have a webinar on that also, as well as in courses that we teach complete classes dealing with Qatar and just how dangerous it is what they do in what's called the civil academic jihad that leads eventually to governance, because these same students who are absorb this education eventually will be leaders in America. The Iranian threat continues, and as we know, continued instability in countries mentioned before, Libya, Lebanon, Syria, and Yemen. That's because of their civil wars. We speak of the Palestinian issue. It is incendiary in the Arab world because they see the Palestinians as part of the Arab world, and this has been a calling cry for 3 generations, as they feel they've been left behind, and therefore the whole Palestinian issue can also explode in the Arab world. The Palestinian issue is the rallying cry in the Arab world, the Muslim world, and could certainly help destabilize regimes that are not particularly rock solid in any case. So now we have defining moments since the 1990s, and we're speaking about what goes on in between Israel and the Palestinians, in particular trying to move forward the Oslo Accords. And as soon as that was done, the Palestine Committee met in Philadelphia, and that's really, the Hamas operatives in the United States, and they began planning to destroy the two-state solution. Begins immediately. 3 weeks after the Declaration of Principles were signed in mid-September, by beginning of October, they were moving to have this elimination of any possibility of peace. And Oslo itself had quite a bit of weaknesses. The whole question of whether it succeeded or failed, right, has always been up in the air. There would be intifadas, in particular Second Intifada, which is obviously after Oslo, beginning in 2000. Border wars with Gaza that we're familiar with going from 2008 up until the present, which is just much more than a border war. And of course, that massive Muslim immigration to Europe. All of that together very destabilizing, and not only here in the Middle East, and Israel was able to contain much of the conflict with the Palestinians, but due to the fallout from the Arab Spring, we know that millions of Muslims, many of them quite jihadi in understanding, made their way to Europe, and it's being felt now, especially their perspectives and activism against Israel since October 7th. All right, so it now becomes an Anglo-European problem. They also have issues of class gaps. We know that that has been going on for a couple of generations, and the far-left Bolshevism that has now arisen, and the Islamic or Muslim populations that have arrived show little interest in integration. So liberal democratic values are under siege. And here on the left, we have a picture of a dinghy crossing from Turkey to Lesbos, an island in Greece, right, where people fled Turkey and many drowned on the way. But to get to the European Union, you have your populist Yellow Vest movement, which was in France when gasoline prices were too high, and wore the yellow vest that, when your car breaks down, you put it on, fix whatever it is at the side of the road. And then the picture of Rafiah or Rafah destruction from January 2025. That's the image that's projected throughout Europe as to what is happening in the Middle East. And all this together makes for lots of instability. So when we're speaking of the anti-extremism of Europe, so we take a look over here and we have a picture of the Polish leader, Donald Tusk. We have the Prime Minister, Sturmer from Britain, Zelensky, everybody familiar with from Ukraine, and Macron of France, and Emirates of Germany. And what's their biggest issue, right? And their biggest issue, as we know, is really what's going on in Eastern Europe. But first, they have to take this anti-extremist position because they need to calm things down at home. And they fear a terror offensive by Islamists. There's no doubt about that. And it certainly could happen. The other worry they have, of course, is that in elections, extremists will get into power, whether it be from the far left or far right. They are not only anti, call it the red-green alliance, and against, of course, fascism, they are anti the greater land of Israel. They don't believe in this messianism, and they very often compare it to jihadism in their own minds, that they're both undermining. Now, land of Israel understandings are a very small piece of land overall, but in their thinking, this is absolutism and based on religion, and we know these regimes are very secular, and they believe in a two-state solution and that there should be a nation state. They didn't force it, but now they feel they have to. They believe that will reduce tensions. It will temporarily, somewhat. No one should expect that it's a panacea. Right? They are totally against Netanyahu's policies now in Gaza. At the beginning, they supported Israel, but as the war is grinding on, and with the latest offensive in Gaza that is beginning step by step, they are totally against the Israeli government, and they believe that it's just intensifying anti-Semitism and undermining their own nations as well. Okay, they want to lower the flames of rebellion, insurrection, mainly, of course, from the far left. But yes, the right, when you look at Germany, they actually are considered more of a threat. So what's the biggest fear in Europe? The Middle East really is a sideline. They want to get done with it and put it aside. They don't want to have to deal with it. They want it to go away. Because their biggest problem, of course, is with Russia. And here I put up just a couple of maps, one showing Ukraine and the areas captured, right, 2014, and then later on, the Russian offensive we see here in blue, right, that essentially failed in 2022. But there are quite a few areas still held by Putin's imperial Russia, if you want. And if we take a look at the larger maps, so we're speaking of this area, right, with Crimea and the Donbass, right, that's here, and Belarus, which is here, is not with the Europeans. They are pro-Russian. So it's as if Russia is here as well. And therefore, the Baltic countries, Poland, in particular, these areas feel threatened and have to pay attention to what's going on in Europe. And yes, they have invested much more in their militaries, something of which they did not want to do, and that Trump called them on it in his first term in office. But now, something like up to 5% of the GDP they're putting into their militaries. And they believe they may have to confront Russia. So that's number one issue. You first have to calm down the population and internal splits. That's where Israel and the Palestinians come into play. So we speak here of the settlement movement, greater land of Israel, and the definition, right, preventing a Palestinian state. And we know that Israel's government of today does want to prevent the establishment of a Palestinian state. Certainly the right-wing elements, very far right in the government, say so outwardly, and we know that Netanyahu has also stated no Palestinian state. And therefore, what do they demand? That there be full Jewish settlement from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, and encourage Palestinian Arabs to leave. How well is it working? Well, there are other settlements, but not working tremendously well. I don't see Palestinians just picking up and leaving. Is it fueling anti-Semitism and instability? The Anglo-European alliance believes that it very much is doing just that. You also have the declarations made, and many of them very harsh towards the Palestinians, especially by far-right ministers, the implementation of settlement growth, right, in Judea, Samaria, the West Bank, and the Hilltop Youth, who are involved in attacks against Palestinian farmers and going into villages. We know there is a very serious extremism there that gets a lot of headlines abroad, and therefore we find that this Anglo-European alliance is totally against Israeli policies, and they believe that Netanyahu threatens them. They believe that Netanyahu threatens Jewish communities. Now, what do the Jewish communities have to say about this? The diaspora jury has made it clear. They very often cannot defend Israeli policies. There are those who do agree with those policies, generally more from the modern Orthodox perspective, but they too feel under siege, and they've made it actually quite clear on occasion that the conflict needs to end. They're under tremendous pressure, and I know of examples of New York, okay, where the largest Jewish community, right, outside of Israel. And the liberal Jewish communities in particular, your Reform, Conservative, Reconstructionist, and other types, they feel totally alienated up to the point that there are those who feel they no longer can really support Israel. And you have, of course, a whole movement of progressive Jews who say, no, we don't need a Jewish state. So there is a major crisis amongst the diaspora jury because of the anti-Semitism and their disconnect with Israel at the moment. We take a look here just at a few statistics and maps, and yes, I took it from Peace Now, which is a very left-wing organization, but their statistics are reliable, and I've never heard of someone disagreeing with their statistics. They may disagree with their political opinion. And what they have is from 1993, saying in the West Bank, Judea, Samaria, there were 110,000 Jews living out there. Gaza, 6,400. East Jerusalem, 140,000, and there were 128 settlements. That's at the beginning of the Oslo Accords. And the idea was to try to, disengage and come up with some sort of conflict resolution based on a two-state understanding. So we get 30 years later, and once again, the numbers change completely. We have 465,000 Jews living in the West Bank, or Judea, Samaria, which is 15% of the total population there. Gaza has none. There was a disengagement in 2005. Israel completely left the Gaza Strip. East Jerusalem, 230,000. And settlements, 146. Outposts, 155, right? Outposts can be on a small hilltop, a few people living there claiming certain lands. And the totals are most important, 93, over 250,000, and I have from 2023, so that's, today is well over 700,000 when you take it all together, and they do include East Jerusalem as, quote, a settlement. The question now comes up of what is called disentanglement. How could there be some sort of peace agreement? We're speaking of these two maps, one that we've seen before, showing Oslo II, with the tan areas being fully under Palestinian control of the Palestinian Authority. The yellow areas, they have civilian control. Israel still has security control. And the very, very light sort of lavender is area C, which is still under Israeli control. Now, the question is, are all these previous maps relevant after everything that has gone on in the last few years? And let's remember, we have the Trump plan from 2020, only 5 years ago. But the American administration is not insisting that that is the plan for peace, something of which had been previously. So we speak of the Palestinian Authority. Is it a partner? Israel says no. There had been the Clinton parameters that brought about the Palestinian Authority, and those were put up in the year 2000. Arafat essentially rejected them. We know that Clinton had hoped there would be peace between Israel and the Palestinians, and he did blame Yasser Arafat. You have what was known as the Olmert Plan. We've discussed it quite a few times in previous webinars and in classes, and Trump, which we do show here on the left. Now, Hamas and the Islamic Jihadis clash with the settlement movement. Both of them want a one-state solution. Neither one of them feels that the other one has a right to be here. And we are speaking here of two religious perspectives, and as perceived in the West as two extremes, very serious extremes at that. The question does come up: can a center-right Israeli government and a new Palestinian representation, not the Palestinian Authority, considered very corrupt, and by the way, has almost no support amongst Palestinians, maybe 15%. All right, can there be some sort of other framework? And here there is a whole discussion basically brought about by right of center, and even say to the right, not extreme, but right-wing political military thinkers, because the left, in trying to come up with a two-state solution and borders, it's not there anymore. So we are speaking here of the possibility of enclaves or cantons ruled by extended families known as chamulas, and you could have quite a few of them, call it 10, 12, whatever, that stitched together could make up some sort of Palestinian entity. Of course, to try to draw borders at the moment is very difficult. But we would just say they would be scattered around the West Bank, Judea, Samaria, right? And Gaza would remain one unit. There would be possibly some sort of federal arrangement, obviously demilitarized. That's been Israel's demand since any discussions of peace concerning the West Bank, Judea, Samaria. There would only be a police force for civilian issues. And let's remember something: Jews and Arabs each make up about 50% of the population from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea today. And the whole question, one-state solution, if Israel was to make such a decision, then 50% of Israel would be Arab, and the question would be, do you give them full citizenship? Israel has 21% of the population today. Arabic speakers, right, includes some who don't identify exactly as Arab, such as the Druze, but Arabic speakers. If you add in all the Palestinian population of the West Bank and Gaza, so there it is. You no longer have a Jewish state. It would be binational, of course. So what borders, and can they be drawn at all? That's one of the big questions. Okay, so we look at these two maps here. Are they relevant at all? So why the activism? Let's get to the bottom line here. Would the Anglo-Europeans and moderate Arabs be so involved if there was no October 7th? Their internal threats catalyzed action for conflict resolution. Is it feasible to come up with some sort of answer? In theory, yes. In reality, only the United States can bring about a conflict resolution, because that's the one ally Israel has, and basically at the moment, Israel doesn't have any alternatives. We know the Europeans and other Anglos are not with Israel on these policies. Determining factor, Trump and the Republican Party. The Democrats are not in power, and they don't support this Israeli policies at the moment. You need a paradigm shift in determining what constitutes a state. And the whole issue, they're going to declare at the UN, but do you want the UN involved? We know peace agreements don't work if the UN is involved. You have to do it bilaterally or with brokers in the middle, and most likely it'll be an American, UN, and moderate Arab group that would help bridge the gaps. But the Americans have to be involved. If not, nothing. It would take a lot of investment in time and money in particular to ensure some sort of successful sort of two-state operation, but the Palestinian state would not be a full state in many ways. It would not it be continuous with one land piece, possibly scattered around, as mentioned. A lot of other questions would need to be answered about security. Is this just public relations and calming internal dissent? Now, for the Arab world, they're very, very serious. And one could say, look, the Europeans have their internal issues, just like Canada and Australia. It is important to them. It is not as crucial as it is to the Europeans. It is extremely crucial for the Arab world. Okay, thank you. And if you have any questions, please send them to us. A lot of the questions are actually answered in classes that we give, because here we've done pretty much an overview, and in other webinars. And there's all the material. You can just, it's open to the public, download, go through it, and we'd love for you to be in touch. Have a good one.